I have a tradition of starting with a new poem, and then just kind of going from there, just to kind of share a little bit about kind of like where I'm at and what I'm thinking about in this moment. So I'll share that and then read some stuff from Let the Dead In. So this is from my second manuscript, which fingers crossed, hopefully will be completed in another year. It's a collection of sermons, prayers, praise poems, because of course that's what you do when you turn 40. You write sermons. And so this is called A Prayer for Me at Age 8. You beautiful, beautiful, stupid, haunted girl. You lawless thief of daddy's face and mummy's grief. You daughter of the Pomeroon. You water baby and midwives, pipe smoking women singing Elvis to pass time. You kin to pork knockers and machetes, hot Guyana nights spent laughing with your little sister to an avalanche of frogs electric in the dark. You summers with granny and yelling cousins, heated games of Monopoly and homemade ice cream. You who survived locked bathroom doors and rapes and daddy telling mummy, I'll break your face by forgetting it all, then remembering, then forgetting again. You who are blue with what you know. Write poems in black and white journals, you sorrel, curry chicken, and bygone choka, daddy singing to you, Michelle, my belle. You thick ponytails and sudden tears, big lips and wide nose, you who hear ghosts calling your name, scared until granny tells you they are just here to keep you safe until it's time to come home. You who stared at the Gorgon, turned to remote stone, and died 100 times so I could live. You Lazarus, you blessing, you hot stove burning, you pepper sauce, you black water, you bright shining world, you brilliant oracle keeping watch as time rolls fierce and desperate. Look at your hands, brown as your mother's, the devil's wife shaking rain. How could you ever doubt what you would become when you are fluent in every river's beginning? So I'm going to read a bit from Let the Dead In, which is my first collection out in the world, published by Squire Publishing. And I will start off with what is the actual first poem in the book, which is Where Does the Story Start? With outrageous grief, so luscious, so rare, we'll keep it for generations. Bring it out at the finest of dinners, plant it in fields and thresh its stalks at night. It starts with a ring of jeweled mermaids, beckoning great Uncle Harold from solid ground to a golden city submerged in shining black water, his wife weeping and weeping at the shores among his rough nets. Harold's boat empty and rollicking in the middle of a river. Him rising after 7 days towards the Pomeroon sun, pulled up wailing by Scale's lovely arms. It starts with the Jambi, dead slave children hungry for friends, pining in the winds behind Great Granny's house, drawn to salt and fevered blue fire. It starts with broken glass, the surprise of blood in a wife's waiting mouth. My great-grandfather's hand curled in a fist. It starts with a riot of stubborn love, more drunk than the pastor at my baptism. With one lie, then another, until a whole world is born and we wait a revolt of Black girls. So I come from a family with a lot of opinions. And one of those opinions is that, or stories, I should say, is that we have a lot to do with mermaids in our family, also known as water babies. And so when I had the opportunity to go to Guyana and talk with Guyanese mythologists, and one of the things that they kept saying to me is that Guyanese mythology was created by our enslavers to subjugate Black and Indigenous people. And so I became really obsessed with about what does it mean to kind of reinvent a lot of these myths and stories and find ways to actually have these folks like the water babies, the moon gazers, the old hikes as like a site of freedom. And so the mermaid became one of my favorite stories to kind of explore. And this is what I came up with. And this is called The Mermaid Speaks. Everything they have said is true. I have eaten men as you would a tangerine, thoughtlessly, reverently, juice smeared about my mouth. Perhaps you would blame me, call me bloodthirsty along with the rest of my kin, the Kanaima, the Olhaig, even the Mazaruni. Roused up a gang of the young, brave on palm wine to come and stake me. And I laugh as surely as you weep on my shores. This ownership, you'll forgive me, I took it as the Dutch did your children. Your forebears came on the same hunt after I ate another man. Your granddaddy? Forgive me. He was lovely. Ripe copper skin, warmed with the sun, singing among the white lotus as if he could charm the roots of trees into fealty. I remember weeping with my sisters below in our city. Maybe he wept too. It's been so long, I can't be sure, and there is nothing I want to pretend with you. So I did what was impossible, swam up, struggling past the pleas of my own mother, burst through the Pomeroon and beseeched him into my arms. Yes, I say begged without shame. You know the men of your blood, what they can drive you to do. And forward he came, fearful of drowning, dancing into my naked red arms. And when I ate him, he urged me on, sang with delight as my teeth met the cradle of his flesh. I have heard his wife crying at our shores, hands tethered to her children, dragging them to and fro as if her love could raise him. The other fishermen say she went mad with grieving. Is this true? So yeah, it was fascinating to kind of be able to like write that and speak of that in this way. So I have often been challenged like around writing funny poems or feeling like they're not like serious or legitimate enough. So I also have a strong sense of humor and personally find myself very funny. And so I tried to do that in my book. I was like, I want moments of laughter. And so this is one of those moments. This is called Adventures of the Third Limb. I want to name our cock Chocolate Thunder. Tammy thinks I've lost my mind. I see our cock as a blaxploitation heroine, resplendent in the finest of neon spandex, draped in golden chains and a velvet cape, stiff and resolution to kick any jive turkey punk motherfucker ass into submission. Our cock has framed pictures of Prince on the wall and listens to Dion Estes to show her sensitive side. She is fluent in 7 languages, drinks Dos Equis, can paint, sing gospel, praise dance, and is head usher at the Church of Dynamic Discipleship. Our cock is the Renaissance dick. And if you are looking at her sideways, bitch, what has your cock done for you lately? Our cock doesn't hide when company comes, stalks out butt naked and sequined pumps, shining with lube, sits spread eagled on the dinner table and says embarrassing shit about the things she would do to Kerry Washington. And when everyone else leaves, and only the 3 of us are left, all limbs and laughter, she pulls me and Tammy closer, our pussies climbing up her veined girth. This is how we fit together. Loud, tight, and eager, our wails her composition, agitated, aching notes, excessio, and broken chord. In the studio later with Smokey, outfitted in a double-breasted Stacey Adams suit, matching gaiters, pinky ring, and straw Panama hat, she'll share a blunt, then play cruisin' while talking shit about how hard we came in the scent of wet. But in that moment, oh, my love. So there's a newer poem I wanted to share with y'all on the theme of audacity, if you will. And I wrote this poem, and it's about Anita Hill. And I wrote it after I read an article in the newspaper, I think it's the Washington Post, about how Ginny, the wife of Clarence Thomas, called Anita Hill requesting an apology a few years ago. And so I decided that I would write a response on behalf of Anita um, to Ginny Thomas's request. And the poem is very creatively entitled, Anita Hill Responds to Ginny Thomas's Request for an Apology. I am so tired, Ginny. Being Black and beautiful, reared to see my life as a lesson to others. I could say something about me nettles, like an errant bee, mosquito, or bird, but that feels like a disrespect in my mouth. You and I know my body occupies a more vast real estate in your mind than your flaccid husband ever could. I'm no fool, Jenny. My forebears worked your people's fields. If I let you eat me alive, you called me your own. Put my picture up on a wall and say, she's a nice gal. There are times I wish I never said anything. Let the truth be a private country that I can trade for an untold kingdom. But then I think of your face, scrunched up, the color of curdled milk, red and screaming for an America of your creation. A pastoral dream of confederacy, Clarence hiding under your graceless skirt, clothed in rough gingham. Me trembling before the genteel violence of your hands, and bitch, please, comes out my mouth, soft like fresh cream, hot from the passage from my full throat, cradled by my tongue, lawless and unmistakable. So that's what I wish Anita Hill would say. But unfortunately, I don't have a way to contact Miss Hill and suggest that as an option. So I'm going to read just a few more to close this out. This one is called Two Fat Black Women Are Making Love. And the joke is right there, ready, shuddering, and alive, rife with promise. There are so many paths that have been worn out for a quick, easy laugh. Tyler Perry strutting with a gun and wig, screaming rotund and loud like a Medea would. Martin calling out your mama on television, or the meme of a young woman shot underhand, her belly in love with a tight skirt, hands moving towards an open mouth. Look at everything she devours. Imagine it. Does it make you hungry too? Two fat Black women are making love on a bed on the floor, and they are weeping for joy. They are crying, great folds of flesh flushing and shaking. One cannot look in the mirror save for thinking of her daddy. All this ugly and skinned together counts the men who say they hate her body as they do bitter cops and dead Black boys. Two fat Black women are making love, and they touch each other like they can hold it. Honeyed, profane body, like patriots, like their bodies have never been folded into freezers, screamed at on streets, coaxed or threatened, sweet, like they have names, like we will know them. I'm going to read two more poems and then close out for this section. So I wrote this poem actually. My mom, who I love dearly, was always like, why are you putting out all of our business all the time? Like, why? And so I tried to write a poem to explain it. And this is what I came up with. It's called Notes on Archiving Erasure. And there's an epigraph from my best friend in my head, James Baldwin. Love does not begin and end the way we seem to think it does. Love is a battle. Love is a war. Love is a growing up. When I say I love my family, what I mean is I worship the battle. You can't wish away creation or reorder blood. Childishly, I thought we could retell stories. I mean to say, I can't lie. In truth, there are wretched days I call my sister and ask, was this real? Did this happen? She says nothing. Part of love can be called refusing to answer. My mother says, let things lie. She means murder it. Let our shame be a suffocating vine. We were made to believe that everything we bore was ugly, a family of shell-shocked gods fleeing their own clay. And yet, I will come back to the door of our own home, sit at its steps, and fall in love with the slow order of our creation, the seasons it took to urge kindness into our natures, how we won glory, even as the city fell. And so the last poem I'm going to read is about one of my true heroes, Harriet Tubman. This was actually born out of an argument because I like to tell people Harriet Tubman is a lesbian. I really feel it in my spirit. I don't know if she was, but I really like telling people. And then I got into an argument with some friends about this. So this is the poem that it birthed, and it is entitled very creatively, Harriet Tubman is a lesbian. Remember the time I said Harriet Tubman was a lesbian and laughed straight for 15 minutes? Jabari said, fuck that. Harriet wasn't trying to turn the underground into Henriettas. But shit, I need a hero, a full-on Black queer woman setting fire to slave ships, cursing out white motherfuckers, and going home to love on Phyllis Hyman's fine-ass great-great-granny. I want a history where Harriet and Sojourner get together and make that cataclysmic, head-banging, good God kind of love. While Luther serenades them, with skin so shining, it looks like he just swam all up in Johnson's and Johnson's. I want him there singing to them. His sequin blazer, the North Star, they follow hand in hand under the cover of knotted trees and vines that rise up to hide them. The glow of lightning bugs, grasshoppers humming as Luther executes a smooth two-step to Wait for Love. Prince behind him, humping the stage. Oh, in that moment, when Sojourner bends down, cups her hands, dips them into a running creek and says, come on, Harriet, drink. Watches the soft pulse and bend of her woman's neck as she feeds sweet water from her palm. And she thinks, someday I'll make me a poem about how I love her. That night, the first time they found the salt to kiss, while Luther reapplies his eyeliner and Prince takes over the mic, crooning, baby, 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 what's it gonna be tonight? Sojourner and Harriet latching on to each other's bodies, sucking nipples like they deliver honeyed wine, hollering a blue, joyful streak over and over in an answering chorus. Thank you so much. Oh, you're on mute.
You would think, as long as I've been doing this, that I would not forget to unmute myself. It's, I was saying just how wonderful that was. I was especially thrilled to hear poems that are new. And also so I invited a couple of my students who are here, so I'm interested to hear if they have questions. But when I talked about your work today, I talked about the Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth poem, and also the Two Fat Black Women poem, which you read. So you read both of those, which I was so excited to do. I want to see first if there's any questions from those of you who are in the audience. If you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A below. So maybe what I'll do is let them ask questions while I ask you a question in the meantime. So it seems like so much of what you seem to be doing is thinking about the role of the poet or the writer as record keeper. And you're very self-consciously writing about the choices that you make in that role, and what we choose to record, what we have to abandon, what we listen to, what we don't listen to. That came up in a couple of your poems back to back. So for example, in What I'm Afraid of, the speaker, and I don't know if you want me to refer to it as the speaker or as you. I always tell my students, don't assume that the speaker of the poems is an I, but
Yeah, I would vote for speaker, probably.
uh, so the speaker is referencing things, quote, that we leave behind to save our own hide. And also read Notes on Archiving Erasure, which I adored. And in that, the speaker's asking the sister, did I make this up? Did this really happen? So I wondered if you could say more about the responsibility the poet has as keeper of the records. And if that's something like you feel as like something you carry around with you.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that question. Like, I think particularly for me as a Black queer woman, someone who is like the descendant of enslaved folks, and also someone, so my family is from Guyana, but the reality is that, we really actually hail from somewhere. According to my latest DNA test, I think somewhere in West Africa, right? So there's just a lot of history that I will just never know or have access to, right? And I've also noticed in terms of the ways that like even my own family's narratives have been shared with me or like the stories that I knew, there's always kind of like this sense of what's being held back to either protect people because of a sense of shame, or because folks haven't necessarily figured out ways to make peace with what that story means for them, right? And so, for me, I think particularly as a poet, like what I see as my role is to tell the stories that otherwise could be lost, right? And I think it's complicated because the reality is I know that I'm operating from a really specific set of values and biases and my own kind of like challenges around like what I'm able to like deal with and what I'm also not able to like feel ready to put on the page. And so I think that also speaks to the fact that like we all have this really beautiful role of maintaining and sustaining the memories of ourselves and like those who have came before us. And my hope is that like, I look at the book Let the Dead In as like part of hopefully the legacy of my family, but I don't see it as the only part, right? And so I think for me, I think that has actually in some ways been freeing because I'm not necessarily moving towards perfection. I'm not writing a history book, but what I am trying to do is find a way to articulate from my perspective what I see as our legacy in this moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned your mom, like I wrote down, why are you always putting out all our business? And I remember seeing a meme that said something like, if like a parent to a child who's a poet, like if I'd known you were going to be a writer, I would have done a lot of things differently when you were growing up,
Yes.
So, so do you get a lot of pushback from your family when you write about family business?
Um,
Or what advice, I guess a follow-up, I'm sorry to interrupt you, a follow-up might be to other poets or writers, like, would you offer advice for how to navigate that tension?
yeah, I think first and foremost, the most important thing is just to write it, right? Like how do you know what's inside you or what needs to be said if you're centering yourself so deeply that you don't even know what you would put on the page, and I find that happens a lot. I think particularly for myself that happens, like there's this feeling of like, oh, I need to protect my family or I need to protect myself, and the reality is that I think what's funny about that is that oftentimes, like what I'm trying to write out or name is yes, there's moments that are really hard and difficult, but there's also a lot of my family that I'm celebrating and that I love, right? And I think, my family's response has been kind of like all over the place. I think they're very, very proud of me for like publishing something and being an artist. And I think, there's just stuff that we don't talk about, right? Which is their choice. And I think for me, where I'm kind of at in my life is that I always knew I wanted to be a poet. I knew I wanted to be a writer. Why would I let anything or anyone stop me from speaking my own truth, right? And that's not to say I'm the only truth, right? Which is, I think, also the difference. I believe there's like, we have the ability to hold multiple truths, but we can't even get to the point of having that conversation unless we're able to kind of name what our personal reality is, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Do you so do you have a lot of do you ever have a situation where you've told a story and somebody else is saying that's not how it happened and I it should have been like this? Do you find yourself dealing with that at all?
No, I mean, funnily enough, I think like what has happened is that I've had like, especially I think particularly with the poems where I talk about like being a survivor of sexual abuse and domestic violence, I've had a lot of folks who I didn't necessarily expect, both like kind of out in the world and more personally, who've been like, oh, I didn't know that. And I've been through that too. Right. And so I think sometimes it's been like a bit shocking because you never know kind of like where it's going to come from or who's going to kind of like name their experience to you. But I think that also speaks to, right? Like I think the power of storytelling and poetry is that like you're making a space that someone can also choose to walk into as well. Right. And see pieces of themselves in their own stories. Like I think back to some of the books that I read when I was a little girl, either it was like A Tree Grows in Brooklyn or it was, for color girls who have considered suicide or Upstate. And I saw bits and pieces of myself throughout all of those books that gave me the possibility of feeling like, oh, okay, I'm not the only one that is a survivor. I'm not the only one who's like this weird Black girl who loves telling stories, right? Or is obsessed with mermaids. Like there's this whole other there are possibilities beyond what my personal frame of reference is that let me know that who I am is more than just a blip on the screen, but I was actually meant to be here. And I think that's probably the most important thing to me.
Yeah, I love that. So giving voice to the voiceless and putting your voice out there so that people who feel isolated and alone recognize themselves in what you're writing and
Yeah.
it's
Oh, sorry.
isolated. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. And I think with that too, like, because I think I don't even think it's a case of where folks don't necessarily have a voice. I think we've been taught to believe we don't have one, right? So it's that ability to be like, oh, wait, no, I don't have to accept this. Or, I don't have to follow the same path. I get to choose, right? Like there's a sense of like agency and power in that feels really exciting.
Yeah, yeah. I'm thinking about so I love your persona poems. I love that the whole most of the second section is and I have to ask you chicken foot. So I looked it up because I was like, what is chicken foot? And the first thing that came up was a picture of a white rock band. And I was like, I bet that's not it. And then the next thing that came up was a picture of Guyanese is snack food. And so
Mhm.
well, is that it? So I that's kind of a secondary question I have is like, well, can you tell us about Chickenfoot? But I loved all that. So you read the mermaid poem, and then you also have from the I'm not sure how to pronounce this. So Hag is the
Old
interpretation.
hide, the old
Hag.
hide, yes. Hmm.
Um, and of course the one that you read, it's not really a persona poem, but you naming the hot chocolate thunder right is in that section. But the choice of using folklore and those voices, inhabiting those voices, and I think you said this, like wanting to reinvent those myths and stories. I love persona poems. I just taught a workshop this weekend about persona poems, and we talked a lot about the responsibility and the caution that we take when we adopt voices of real people. Um,
Hmm.
and I always like the adoption of the mythical because then I'm not running into any concerns about co-opting those voices. But do you want to talk a little bit about? I know you said you love the persona poem, your history with that, and what draws you to it, and then of course who Chickenfoot is.
Yeah, sure. So, with persona poems, I come from a family of like a lot of storytellers. Like I very much like remember hearing like, when I'm younger, I mean, honestly, to this day, like my dad is forever telling some kind of story, the same for my mom, right? Like everybody has a story. And so, I'm always really fascinated in people with strong voices and strong character. And then, like, also thinking about, like, even when it comes to inanimate objects, right? Like, what would they speak like? Or so, for example, like the Anita Hill thing, like, I was just so taken aback by Ginny Thomas's audacity that I was like, I want to hear what Anita Hill would say. And from everything, I do not know Anita Hill, to be clear. So this is just all in my head. But like, I was just like, what would Anita Hill say? Like, if she was actually, she seems like a very classy person. So, I just could imagine it being very classy. But I was like, I need to, for my own spiritual well being, like, write out that response and read Ginny Thomas, because someone has to. And so a lot of times, like, I'm just fascinated and like thinking about, like, what would this response look like from the context of this person, right? From someone like Anita Hill, who literally staked her life and her reputation, and her career in order to call out this person, right? And then also too, like, I also find it very entertaining. Like, so, as I mentioned, mermaids have a lot to do with like my family's lore and history. I do have an Uncle Harold, a great Uncle Harold, who said he was kidnapped by mermaids. So I was like, I wonder what that mermaid was thinking. Why would she kidnap my great Uncle Harold out of all people? Right. And so I think really just starting from that sense of curiosity is important. I will say, to your point, like, I do, when I think about personas, I do find myself with a strong sense of connection to people that, like, I share some kind of commonality with, which I think maybe shifts how it is I talk, or how I would imagine or construct that persona poem. And I think in terms of, it, like, I do, I think I do really try to hold some values around, like, okay, like, am I just taking someone else's life story? Does this feel inauthentic? I really try to ask myself, typically after I write it, or like after the first draft, of like, what is the direction of this? Does this feel good and aligned with me and how I would want other folks to treat, like, if someone decided to write a persona poem about me, how would that translate, right? And so those are kind of the big things that come up. But also I just honestly do it because it tickles me. Um, yeah, and then I think with chickenfoot, chickenfoot is, yes, it is a snack in Guyana. And in my family, there's a lot of men who, like, are kind of bombastic, really emotional, brilliant, thoughtful, um, and can't seem to leave women alone. So, I think, like, I was really curious about, like, exploring that as like a character in my work.
Oh, it's great answers. I see that we have a question from Brianna Cook.
Mhm.
Saida, for your process, do you typically have a compelling idea or not that you're trying to work through in poetry that takes a long time to untie? Or does the work come more like lightning and form very quickly, or something else? So my question is your writing process more slow and deliberate, or quick and powerful? What a great question, Brianna.
Yeah. Um, that would be yes. So, I'll say, the reality is that I have poems, especially now, I'm 42 now. A lot of the poems I'm writing now, like, I've been trying to write for years and couldn't find the words to write them. Or maybe I wrote one version and I was like, oh, I hate it. And then, like, I put it away and I forget about it. And then I don't know, like, I move forward in terms of like reading other people's poetry, thinking about that issue. And I come to like kind of a different place on it. In fact, I can share, so my grandmother passed away a few years ago, and there was, a lot that I was processing about her life. And I've been trying to write about it since I want to say 14. And I just was able to write it like a week ago and got to a place where I'm like, yes, this is what it needs to be. So I'll just share it to give you a sense. So it's called A Brief Sermon on Grief for Joy Wong. I've lost so much to death, and it is here crowded in this church with me. Listening to the priest speak on what we can't do to mourn, be it sing or cry or go without prayer. He warns, beware of the selfishness of despair. And I take my mummy's hand as if I were 13 again. Watching her mummy, my granny, the first Christmas home from Rikers Island, the way we swarmed around her, the gifts crowding out even a hint of the floor. Granny surrounded by torn paper and ribbons, expensive sweaters she would never wear, turning her head to a white wall and wailed with defiant rage. The only time I remember her so unbowed and beautiful, almost incandescent. We could never talk of prisons around her or the family friend who tricked her into ferrying liquid cocaine past pretended American borders, or the burning shame I buried for knowing someone who went to jail. We were so new in our privilege. The suburban house mortgaged to the gills, summer camps at university, the honor roll. I did not want to risk it. God forgive me. So I denied her. God forgive me for never saying, I love you, don't leave me. I'm so glad you're back home. Silence has got to be kind of a sickness with us. I think we deserve more. I think we deserve beauty. We deserve to tell each other things like how precious we are, how precious Granny was, how brave she must have been in that cell, imprisoned by fools, how I wish at 13 I had courage.
Mm.
So yeah, that took me, 13. So that took me 29 years to write. Now, if you would ask me like, oh, like at the time, like how long is this poem taking to write in the midst of that process? I wouldn't have told you. It's been 20 something years. I just would have been like, oh, I wrote a poem and it was crap. But the reality is I think it's about having faith in your process. And I think it's almost about like your craft being able to catch up with your heart, you know? Or at least that's what it's been for me. So I think it's having patience, because sometimes you will have that moment of genius that strikes you and you're like, yes, and it just comes out perfectly formed, right? And then other times you have to wait 29 years. But there's a beauty in that waiting, right? And a beauty in being able to be like, oh, okay, I've been able to stretch my craft and my discipline and my skill in this way to be able to speak what it is I want to say.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember writing something for a course when I was in graduate school for a nonfiction course. It was a traumatic thing that had happened to me within the 3 months prior, and turning it in, and my professor saying, I think you probably need a little more distance from this
Mhm.
to really be able to understand what you're working through. Um, so,
I agree. Yeah. Hmm.
so that was a great question, Brianna, and a really good answer to that. I wanted to ask you, hmm, I wanted to ask you about, well, because that was said in the church, that particular poem, and I was thinking about various themes that are connected throughout Let the Dead, and one is your relationship to spirituality and divinity, and I'm wondering if you want to talk about that at all, about how that informs your work.
Yeah, what's funny is that, I mean, and I think this also goes back and speaks a little bit to like kind of the impact of colonization and then also the history of resistance within that. So a lot of kind of, the traditional religions, had to be practiced undercover by enslaved folks, right? So, in Guyana, we called it Obia, in Haiti, they called it something else. Of course, the name is completely escaping me right now. Boudon, right? And so from a very early age, I can remember, family members having altars, but us not seeing exactly what they were for. And like having a strong understanding that, yes, there was God, but there were also like the spirits of the people that had come before us, and they were always with us, right? Um, and so I think for me, I've come to a place in my work where I want all of that richness in my work. Like I want to kind of share those like interrelated ties about like, yes, for me, in terms of my own construct, I see a God, but what about the spirit world that is around us that we acknowledge? And when I think about spirits, like I think about those people that we carry with us, right? Knowing and unknowing. And I think that's also honestly like why my work, like I'm not really interested in binaries because I don't really see things as a yes or no. I see it as like, it sounds so pedantic, but like a galaxy, right? Like the reality is there's so few things that are just could be one thing or the other. It's like, do you want this? Like it's almost like Burger King. You could have it almost any way you want. And so I'm really interested in those kinds of like comments on God or spirits, is that there's so many different possibilities. Why wouldn't that be represented in our work,
Yeah. So, so I want to see if there was another. Okay. So I thought there was another question there, but there wasn't. Can you, I want to talk about the third section
Mhm.
because it really focuses on the violence enacted on Black and Brown bodies, and with particular attention to queer and trans bodies.
Mhm.
Um, when you put the book together, how did you see that section connecting with the other sections? Like what was your, like in terms of your organizing frame for it, what was your thought process there?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question, right? I think, and now I have to go back and like look at it. Uh, So, that section, I believe I called American Love, right? And that was on purpose. Well, I guess it would be. It was my book, right? I was like, a lot of this violence is almost like a suffocation of love, right? Or this like forced colonization and patriarchal violence that we see folks suffering through. Um, and I'm a survivor of domestic violence, particularly in the time that I was writing this book. That's when Freddie Gray was murdered. There was a number of murders that happened during that time. And also, quite frankly, a lot of it was organized around this one poem, The Ballad of Reese Taylor, who I'd not heard about, until like my late 30s. And for context, for folks who may not know, Reese Taylor was a Black woman who was gang raped and during the Jim Crow era. And, while that was not, unfortunately, an unusual violent act to happen, what was different is that she actually pressed charges against them with the support of Rosa Parks, which I think is really like just interesting that that also is not really talked about, right? And so, I really see Reese Taylor as a folk hero, right? And so, the people that I write about in this section, I guess including myself, like I see as folk heroes, I see as people who really have taken, systems that were set up for our to really threaten our own mortalities, really lethal systems, and say no, I deserve to live, right? um and so that was something that I really wanted to celebrate. And even when I think about what it means to kind of say American love, I think really what I'm talking about are people who are refusing to let their own loves be killed or die in this system, right? And so I think that really became the nucleus of that third section.
Yeah. Um, and that's the thing, that one of the things that struck me so much about your work is that there is a lot of violence in the stories that you're telling. The domestic violence, you talk about your grandmother, and I'm assuming I don't know, your grandfather, or the speaker's grandfather, um, and the violence there. And yet, and even with the 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 poem that's about being raped as a young child,
Mhm.
there's mercy. Uh, there's mercy and compassion for those who are cruel and enacting the violence in many ways. And I wondered about that, because I think that's, when you look at all these atrocities, it's really hard to find a place of compassion. And how, like, where do you find that? how do you get to that?
Yeah, I think it's a journey. I think it goes back to this thing around the binary, right? I think I don't think mercy takes away from the horror, right? Like I'm speaking for myself, like as a survivor, I I'm no longer interested in like just being like, oh, well, this person is a completely fucked up, horrible person. I mean, actually, like what I think it is we need to talk about the reality that sexual violence is part of the project of white supremacy and colonialism, right? And so then if we're all kind of caught up in that system, then what does it mean for us to imagine a world where sexual violence no longer exists and we're no longer being used as tools against that? That doesn't absolve people who perpetrate harm of responsibility. But I think refusing to go against this binary where it's like, oh, well, that person who did that is a really horrible person. That was a deeply horrible act that changed the course of my life. And if I just stop there, I can never get to a place where, for the generations that come behind me, that we can talk about a world where this no longer exists. And so I think that's like honestly what you see me grappling with a lot in these stories. And also the truth is for many of us, we love people who have caused great, great harm. And that doesn't mean that we're bad people. It doesn't even mean the person that's caused great harm is a bad person either. But it means that we need to find ways of loving and holding each other that make us work towards a better world.
So beautifully said. I was thinking as you were talking about, I teach, or I used to teach, I haven't taught in a while, Lolita.
Oh, mhm.
There's so much controversy surrounding the teaching of that, but I always find it like so important to teach within safe context, but to teach us to stories to try and understand why, from the perspective of abusers, like, what's the motivation and why do people behave this way, and to not turn them into monsters. I also just finished teaching Frankenstein,
Oh, okay. Hmm.
about the monster and these horrific atrocities that he creates, but why, and I think one of the reasons that novel continues to be so relevant today, and we just like Poor Things, right? I don't know if you saw Poor Things,
I have it on my it's on my to watch list. Yeah.
but just like trying to understand why people behave the way that they do. And that's why we love literature. That's why I love literature, is to try and understand the human condition. um Oh, it's 7:54 already. So I know I wanted to give you time to read another poem before we close. Let me see if there's any other questions, though, I have a whole list, but um, any other questions? I don't see any. All right, well, do you have a poem that you want to close out?
Yeah, sure. And so this is from my new manuscript as well, and it's a prayer, and it's called Let the World Be Like My Pussy.
Hmm.
The first time I looked at my pussy was after reading The Color Purple. You remember the part. Miss Seeley takes a mirror, angles it between her own soft black thighs, and gasps at the beguiling wonder of wet purple dusk, blind to the mundane tasks of the day. Mister or even shug, and the hazy delights her lips can erupt unbidden. Why labor when your body is built for pleasure? Let the dishes go unwashed, the food stand moldering, fringed with its own new fungal birth. Look at yourself and know what is at the center. I've taken thousands of photos, my finger is a sacred bee, cradling the clit and labia like light she keeps changing. 6 days a month, pussy is a wraith, bitter, bloody, and turning, madder than apples, limbed with its own haunting. Then pussy becomes a centaur, winged, pounding, soft and glorious, charging. She is, in short, impossible but a revolution, a volta when another pussy is locked against her. I know the world can be like this, curling and attentive, lovelorn and imperious. Angle the mirror closer. Let us know that in any language or form, we are utterly, unerringly beautiful. Let us find the center, a shining galactic aperture, and begin again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Saida, for the wonderful reading. That was really beautiful. Thank you, Elizabeth, for such a memorable conversation. And thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. As a reminder, Saida's book has been posted in the chat if you'd like to order it. And yeah, have a great night, everyone.
Thank you all so much.